"Are you out of your mind, Linda?" I shouted over the ringing echo of twisted metal, my boots crunching on shattered plastic, as I stepped toward the smoking SUV welded into my ranch gate. The night was lit up in strobes, red and blue from the deputy's cruiser, white from the neighbor's porch lights, orange from my own security flood. The reinforced gate stood at an ugly angle, steel spikes bent but holding, like the jaw of some stubborn animal refusing to open. Linda sat behind the airbag, hair wild, mascara streaked, one hand still clamped on the steering wheel, as if she could will the car backward through time. "You sabotaged me," she screamed, voice breaking as the airbag deflated with a hiss. "This is illegal. That thing is a death trap." "It's a gate," I said, jaw tight. "You rammed it, again." Gravel crunched behind me. Deputy Morales adjusted his duty belt, eyes flicking from the ruined front of Linda's Lexus to the spikes glinting under the floodlight. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to stay still until EMS checks you out," he said, calm but flat. "Sir, step back from the vehicle." Linda ignored him, jabbing a finger at me. "He's in violation of the HOA. That gate isn't on the approved list. I told you I'd have it taken down, Luke. You can't booby-trap a community entrance just because you think you're some cowboy engineer." I felt that old heat rise in my chest, the same anger I'd carried home from deployments and tried to bury under fence posts and irrigation lines. "I sent the specs to the board," I said, keeping my voice low. "For months, you kept tearing my old gate out with your little inspection drives. So I built one that could actually stand up to your bumper." Morales cleared his throat. "Let's slow this down. Ms. Taylor, did you intentionally drive into the gate?" "It was dark," she snapped. "And he moved it. He moved it closer to the road to trap me. This is retaliation. I was documenting violations." I almost laughed. "At 11:30 at night?" Her eyes flashed. "You think you're clever, Luke? You think the board won't see this for what it is? You're done. I'll have your livestock easement revoked. No more rusted farm junk on display." Over her shoulder, I caught movement at the property line. Mark from next door stood half in shadow, bare feet on the gravel, arms folded over his faded t-shirt. He met my eyes, then quickly looked away, like he wanted to say something and swallowed it. Thunder rolled low over the desert hills, or maybe it was just my pulse in my ears. The steel spikes I'd welded along the lower rail were smeared with white paint and plastic. They'd done exactly what I designed them to do, transfer the force into the posts, not my fences, not my cattle, not my home. Morales exhaled, scribbling in his notebook. "So, just so I'm clear," he said, "you, as HOA president, were driving your personal vehicle into this private ranch entrance for an inspection in the dark?" Linda's cheeks flushed a deeper red. "The board empowered me to enforce standards. His property is the first thing people see coming into Mesa Verde Ranch Estates. It looks like a scrapyard. That gate is a menace." "What would you do?" I asked, my voice quieter now. "If someone kept using a rulebook to ram your life until there was nothing left standing? Because that's what this is, Linda. You hit my gate because you couldn't stand that I finally followed your rules better than you did." She stared at me, breathing hard, trapped between an airbag and her own momentum. "If you were me, standing there with your work finally holding its ground, while the person who'd been ramming your gate, literally and on paper, sat in a wrecked car accusing you of sabotage, what would you have done next? Think about that while you hit subscribe, because this whole mess started long before the steel spikes and the screaming. Let me back up and tell you how this started. From the very first nasty notice, I didn't sleep the night of the crash. By the time the tow truck hauled Linda's mangled Lexus down the road, the desert sky had faded from black to a dusty violet. Coyotes yipped somewhere out past the mesquite stand, as if mocking all of us for pretending the neighborhood was anything like civilized. Morales had left after taking our statements, promising an incident report without commentary, though the tight set of his mouth told me he had plenty of commentary in mind. Mark lingered a while longer at the edge of my property, hands shoved in the pockets of his pajama pants, shifting his weight like he was standing on hot coals. He didn't say a word, just nodded once, barely, and slipped back to his porch. The witness who didn't want to witness. Not yet. Now, hours later, the sun was a gold blade cutting over Mesa Verde Ranch Estates, and I was still pacing along the gateposts, running my fingers over the bends and gouges. Every mark told a story, and this one was written in plastic shards and arrogance. Linda had been targeting me for nearly a year, but the gate was always her favorite pressure point. She hated that my land, 10 acres of hard pan and grass, the last true ranch in a neighborhood that had tried to rebrand itself into something prissy, stood at the entrance. She hated the cattle. She hated the dust. She hated that I was here before the HOA even existed. And she hated most of all that she couldn't push me out. But things hadn't always been this volatile. The flashback, I promise, starts here, 6 months before the steal, before the spikes, before the crash, before Linda decided to make me her personal crusade. It was early spring when the trouble began in earnest. The wildflowers had just started painting the hills, the kind of morning where you could smell the dew lifting off the sagebrush. I was tightening the hinges on my old wooden gate when I heard the unmistakable crunch of tires on gravel. Linda's white Lexus rolled up, spotless as always. She stepped out with her clipboard already in hand, like she slept with that thing under her pillow. She adjusted her sunglasses even though the sun hadn't cleared the ridge. "Luke," she said, in that clipped professional tone she used when pretending she wasn't here to ruin my day. "We've received a report that your gate is encroaching 8 inches past the approved boundary line." I leaned on the post driver and raised an eyebrow. "A report? From who? That's confidential? Linda, the only person who drives this road is you." She ignored that. "The board will need you to remove this gate and install one that matches the neighborhood's aesthetic standard. Cedar slats, neutral stain, we can provide the design packet." I laughed. I couldn't help it. "This gate has been here since '91. It's on my land. Your design packet came in 2006. She pursed her lips. "The community has evolved. Yeah, into something that doesn't look like a community anymore. Remove it," she said, "or we'll issue fines." That was our first real fight. She left in a cloud of dust, and within the week, I got 3 violation notices: gate, fencing, general clutter, which was a stack of lumber. I'd dealt with difficult officers in the Army, difficult contractors on work sites, difficult customers who didn't know which end of a level was up. But this was different. Linda wasn't enforcing rules. She was hunting. That same week, I met the witness who would later matter more than I realized. Mark. He showed up at my fence line holding a mug of coffee, looking like he hadn't planned to talk to me but forced himself anyway. "Morning," he said, voice low. "Look, about the gate thing. I told Linda she was pushing too hard." "You told her?" I asked, surprised. He shifted, towing a rock. "Doesn't matter. She doesn't listen. But you should know she's been meeting with the board without minutes, off-record stuff." That got my attention. "Like what?" He hesitated, eyes darting toward Linda's street. I don't want trouble. Just watch your back. She's trying to set precedent." He walked off before I could get more out of him, shoulders tight like he was expecting someone to call him out for even speaking to me. At the time, I didn't grasp how deep her maneuvering went. But that little warning, it planted the first seed of the strategy I'd eventually use against her, professional expertise exposing wrongdoing. What I discovered next would turn an annoying HOA feud into a full-blown war. And this war? It didn't start with steel. It started with a single document I wasn't supposed to see. The document showed up in my hands by accident, or at least that's what Mark claimed later. Whether it truly slipped out of Linda's folder during one of her self-appointed inspection drives, or whether he'd grown a conscience and quietly intervened, I still don't know. All I knew was this. Once I read it, I couldn't unsee the truth. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The morning after Linda first ordered me to remove the old gate, I drove into town for supplies. Bolts, hinges, a new level. Things I actually needed, not the aesthetic compliance kit she insisted on. When I came back, I found a manila folder wedged between the slats of the gate like a misdelivered letter. No stamps, no labels, just a faint smear of dust across the flap. I scanned the road. No cars, no footprints except mine. Inside were pages of meeting notes, unofficial ones, scribbles, half-sentences, HOA board discussions that made my stomach sink. They were talking about phasing out livestock allowances, restricting non-conforming structures, rezoning the lots nearest the entrance to curate a more uniform community identity. In other words, get rid of the ranch, get rid of me. I hadn't lived through war, come home, built a life from dug post holes and sweat. just to have someone with a clipboard and a superiority complex erase it because it didn't match her cedar-stained dreamscape. I was still reading when gravel shifted behind me. "Luke, hey," a voice said. I turned. Mark stood by the fence line again, wearing work boots and a gray hoodie, hair pushed back in a way that made him look younger than usual, but what really stood out was the guilt flickering across his face, like someone holding a secret too hot to keep, but too dangerous to drop. "Morning," I said. "You lose something?" His eyes dipped to the folder in my hands. "Maybe." All the tension in his shoulders telegraphed hesitation. He scratched the back of his neck, avoiding eye contact. I might have mentioned to Linda that the board should at least review the bylaws before going after your property. She didn't like that. I think she's planning something big at the next meeting. "Bigger than trying to erase my entire livelihood?" I asked. Mark winced. "Look, I didn't want to get involved, but I don't like the way she talks about your land. Like it's an eyesore she's entitled to bulldoze." I held up the folder. "This yours?" He shook his head too quickly. No, shouldn't be. I mean, I don't know anything about that." His words were denial, but his body betrayed him. Weight shifting, fingers drumming against his thigh, eyes flicking toward Linda's cul-de-sac, like he expected her to appear and drag him away for treason. "You know this isn't legal," I said quietly. "Private meetings, off-record changes, selective enforcement. If this gets out—" "Please," he whispered, stepping closer. "Don't say my name if you do anything with it. I've got 2 kids. I can't. She'll make my life hell." His voice cracked just enough that I believed him. He wasn't siding with me out of courage. He was siding with me because fear pushed him to the one safe place he had left. "I won't drag you into it," I said. He exhaled hard, relief shaking visibly through his shoulders. "Thanks, and, Luke, be careful. She's been telling the board you're unpredictable." That stung, not because it was false, but because it was something I'd worked years to outrun. Combat dust didn't wash off easily. Even in peace, the shadows followed. Mark left with a nervous half-wave, disappearing behind the junipers as quickly as he had appeared. I stood there for a long moment, the folder warm in my hand from the rising sun. The desert wind stirred, carrying the faint smell of creosote, a storm brewing somewhere in the distance. I knew then that this wasn't about a gate. It wasn't about aesthetics or bylaws or cedar slats. It was about power. And if Linda wanted a war on paper, I'd meet her on paper. I'd spent years as an Army engineer, drafting, reading, and enforcing structural standards. If there was one battlefield where I could outmaneuver her, it was in the fine print. But to expose her, I needed proof, real proof. And that meant going deeper, which is exactly what led to the first major escalation, one that didn't involve steel or spikes, but a discovery I made through professional observation, one that would crack her authority wide open. And it all started with a single line in that stolen document, one I almost missed. That one line, 6 sloppy words scribbled in the margins, changed everything. Variance approved without full board. It sat there between a half-finished bullet point and a doodle that looked suspiciously like a smug little sun. A variance approved without a full board vote meant someone was bypassing procedure. And in an HOA as rigid as Mesa Verde Ranch Estates, procedural violations were the equivalent of structural cracks in a load-bearing wall. Tiny at first glance, catastrophic once pressure hit. I knew then I needed to see the official records, not the sanitized minutes the board cherry-picked for residents. The real files, the signatures, the timestamps, the approvals that weren't approvals at all. In the Army Corps of Engineers, we were trained to see when someone had falsified structural reports, pencil width, indentation pressure, inconsistent spacing, all the little tells that said something wasn't honest. Paper lies if you know how to interrogate it. So, I started with what was publicly accessible, the HOA portal. That afternoon, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, sun slanting through the blinds, hitting dust motes like floating sparks. I typed in my credentials, clicked meeting minutes, and scrolled to the date of the suspicious notes. Nothing. The official minutes were squeaky clean, not a whisper of rezoning, no mention of livestock allowances, no talk of entrance, uniformity. Instead, they'd logged a discussion about pool furniture replacements and the annual chili cook-off. A complete lie. My jaw tightened. I clicked into the variance logs. And there it was, my gate listed as non-compliant structure pending removal, marked as reviewed and approved for enforcement by Linda herself. No second signature, no board majority, no timestamp from the secretary. Illegal on 3 counts. Then something else caught my eye. A second variance, approved 2 months earlier, for a pergola on the far north cul-de-sac. Property owner, Mark Shepard, the conflicted witness himself. Approved by Linda. Sole signature. I leaned back, hands on my face. That explained everything. Why he shifted when he talked to me. Why he feared her. Why he warned me without fully stepping in. She had him under her thumb. She'd granted him a structure approval she had no authority to give. If anyone dug into it, he'd be complicit in an unapproved build, and she knew it. I wasn't angry at him. I was furious for him. But fury doesn't win wars. Facts do. So I printed everything, minutes, variances, logs, and started comparing, side by side, line by line, like a forensics report. That's when the patterns emerged. Handwriting shifts, digital timestamps that didn't align, metadata showing edits after official posting, a missing vote tally, a policy amendment uploaded at 2:16 a.m., the night before a board meeting. Linda wasn't just abusing power, she was altering records. I heard gravel crunch outside. Through the window, Mark approached the gate, hands shoved in his jacket pockets, shoulders curled as if bracing against the wind, though the afternoon was still. I stepped outside. "You okay?" I asked. He glanced around nervously. "Can we talk? Real quick?" I nodded and led him toward the shade of the barn. He kept his eyes on the ground the whole walk. "She came to my house," he said quietly. "This morning. She said you were stirring up trouble, that she'd hate to see my pergola become an issue." His voice trembled on the last word. I clenched my jaw. "Mark, she approved that variance illegally. If anything happens, it's on her, not you." He looked up sharply, fear and hope warring in his eyes. "You can prove that?" "I can," I said. "But I need more. I need to know what else she's done off the record. You've been in the room. You've heard things." He backed up a step. "No. Luke, I told you. I can't be involved." His hands were shaking. I softened my tone. "I'm not asking you to testify. I'm asking if you've seen anything, even small details, anything that helps me expose what she's doing." He swallowed hard. She holds meetings without notice, tells us they're informal planning sessions. She votes alone. She writes minutes before the meeting even happens. And she told the treasurer not to upload the raw variance data. That was it. A full crack in the beam. "Mark," I said gently, "you just gave me exactly what I needed." He went pale. "I shouldn't have said that. I shouldn't—" "You're helping stop someone who's abusing power," I said, "not just to hurt me, but to control you and everyone else." He stood there breathing through his nose, fists clenched. "I'm not brave like you," he whispered. "You don't have to be brave," I said. "You just have to stop being her pawn." His eyes flicked toward Linda's cul-de-sac again. Then he nodded, barely, but enough. It was the moment he shifted from passive witness to quiet ally. And it fueled the next escalation, because once I understood the scope of her manipulation, I realized the only way to beat Linda was to use my professional expertise to expose her foundational lies. And that opportunity came faster than I expected. The opportunity arrived 3 days later, wrapped in a deceptively ordinary envelope with the Mesa Verde Ranch Estates letterhead printed across the top. Mail like that always carried a certain weight, usually fines, sometimes threats disguised as courtesy reminders. But this one felt heavier, thicker, formal. I opened it at the kitchen counter, sunlight carving a bright line across the laminate, a whisper of paper sliding free. And there it was. Notice of board review. Mandatory attendance required. The date was in 2 days. The subject, property non-compliance hearing regarding unauthorized gate alterations. Unauthorized. The word sat on the page like a challenge. I stared at it, pulse steadying into something cold and focused. If Linda wanted to drag me into a hearing, she was giving me exactly what I needed. A platform with official record keeping. A place where the cracks I'd found could be forced into the open. I read the document twice more, paying close attention to formatting, spacing, header alignment. Something felt off, subtle but off. The HOA template always used a double-line header. This one had a single line. The footer spacing was wrong by half a centimeter. The date in the signature block used the wrong font. It wasn't produced by the HOA secretary. It was produced by Linda. I didn't smile, but my jaw loosened. Professional expertise wasn't just about seeing what was there. It was about seeing what should be there and wasn't. That night, I laid everything out on the dining table. Official minutes, variance logs, the stolen notes, printed metadata reports, a paper war map. The soft hum of the refrigerator was the only sound as I annotated margins, circled discrepancies, and drew lines connecting each violation like a structural stress test diagram. By midnight, the patterns were undeniable. By 2 a.m., I had a presentation ready. By sunrise, I had a plan. The morning of the hearing, the sky hung low and gray, rare for our desert valley. The smell of rain clung to the air. I walked to the community center, with a folder under my arm and dust on my boots, passing neighbors who pretended not to look at me. Except one. "Luke," a voice called. Mark stood beside the walkway, arms crossed, expression tight. He looked like a man trying not to explode from the inside. "You going in?" he asked. "Yeah." He swallowed visibly. "Listen, I need to tell you something before you walk through that door." His gaze flicked toward the tinted windows of the community center, then back to the ground. His foot traced anxious half circles in the gravel. "She met with the board last night," he whispered. "Said she's going to recommend removing your livestock easement entirely. Claims it's emotionally distressing to the neighborhood aesthetic. She's been repeating that phrase all week." I exhaled slowly. "That's not even a legal justification." "I know," he said, "but she's got them scared. Half the board just follows her lead. The others—" He trailed off and rubbed his forehead. "I shouldn't be telling you this." "You should," I said softly. "You're doing the right thing." He shook his head. "I'm doing the dangerous thing. Linda already suspects I'm talking to you. She cornered me outside the mailbox yesterday. Asked if I was getting sentimental about the cows." His laugh was hollow and pained. I put a hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to take the stand. You don't even have to be in the room. I've got what I need." His shoulders eased, but only slightly. "Just don't make it obvious I helped." "I won't." He hesitated again, then murmured, "Good luck," before slipping away, hugging the shrub line as though Linda might materialize from behind a yucca plant. Inside, the board sat at a folding table, 5 members, all wearing that carefully neutral HOA expression, except Linda at the center. She wore a pale blue blazer and an expression like she'd already won. "Mr. Harding," she said coolly, "thank you for joining us. Let's begin." She launched straight into accusations, non-compliant structures, unapproved materials, disregard for community standards. Her voice had that bright, brittle tone, like a paintbrush dipped in acid. I let her run, let her build her case, let her get comfortable. Then I opened my folder. "Before we proceed," I said, sliding the first document across the table, "I'd like to enter several items into the record, specifically examples of procedural violations in the approval process that directly affect this case." Linda's smile twitched. The secretary glanced at the document, eyebrows knitting. This variance was approved by Linda alone. That's not correct." "That's not all," I said, placing the next page down. "This meeting minute set was altered after posting. Metadata confirms unauthorized edits." One by one, I laid out the discrepancies, handwriting mismatches, missing signatures, unlogged vote tallies. Each paper hit the table like a hammer strike. The board members shifted, whispered, frowned. Linda's face drained. "This is highly inappropriate," she snapped. "These documents were obtained illegally." "No," I said calmly. "They were obtained through professional review of publicly accessible records, and through noticing errors only someone with engineering-grade scrutiny would catch. Nothing illegal, just honest observation." Silence wrapped the room like tensioned wire. The chair cleared his throat. "Linda, is this accurate?" Her jaw clenched. "He's misreading—" "No," the treasurer cut in, lifting a page. "This timestamp is impossible. The system doesn't allow retroactive edits." Another crack in the beam. I watched Linda inhale sharply, her composure fracturing. The escalation had begun. And the next phase, exposing her intent, not just her errors, was coming fast. But first, I had to hold the line until the board realized just how deep her manipulation went. The moment the treasurer questioned the timestamp, Linda's confidence evaporated like water on hot asphalt. She tried to recover, lifting her chin, smoothing her blazer, but her hands trembled just enough for the board to notice. The silence in the room thickened. Even the old HVAC unit seemed to hold its breath. I closed my folder slowly, deliberately. If the board wants a full audit, I said, I'll cooperate. But let's be clear. If these procedural violations affect my case, they affect every enforcement action Linda has taken for the past year, including approvals she's issued alone. A faint, strangled sound escaped Linda's throat. The secretary shifted, tapping his pen nervously. Linda, you told us these documents were verified. She didn't answer. Her jaw flexed like she was biting down on something sharp. The board chair cleared his throat. We should adjourn briefly, review these. Linda shot to her feet. No, we don't need a recess. This is a distraction. Classic non-compliant homeowner theatrics. He's twisting administrative errors into a conspiracy. I leaned forward slightly. Administrative errors don't rewrite metadata. They don't alter signatures. And they don't approve variances at 2 a.m. Her eyes snapped to mine, with a hatred so fierce it felt like heat on my face. You think you're smarter than this board? She spat. No, I said quietly. I think I understand how structures fail, and this one is failing from the top. A murmur circulated through the board. The treasurer whispered something to the chair. The chair nodded slowly, eyes narrowing at Linda like he was evaluating her for the first time instead of the 100th. Then something unexpected happened. Mark stepped into the doorway. He shouldn't have been there. He told me he wasn't coming, but now he stood framed by the fluorescent hallway, gripping the doorframe with white knuckles, face pale as chalk. His throat bobbed as he swallowed. When his eyes met mine, they flickered with raw fear, but also a decision. The board turned toward him. Mark, the chair asked, did you need something? Linda froze, truly froze, like a predator spotting a defection in her ranks. Mark stepped inside, voice thin but steady. I think the board should hear something about those informal meetings. Linda hissed. Mark, don't. He flinched but continued. Those were presented to us as planning sessions, but Linda, she made decisions, alone. She told us not to log votes. She said the secretary didn't need to attend. The room reacted like he detonated something. The secretary lifted his pen again, this time with purpose. I wasn't told about any planning sessions. They weren't planning, Mark whispered. They were board meetings, but she didn't want them on record. Linda rounded on him, voice low and vibrating with fury. You coward! You ungrateful little— Linda, the chair snapped. That's enough. Her mouth hung open for half a second before she shut it, breathing hard. I stepped forward. If the board wants more documentation, I can provide it. But I also want to be clear. I'm not here to dismantle this HOA. I'm here to stop abuses of power that threaten my property, my livelihood, and apparently my neighbors too. Mark's eyes glistened, just a flicker. The look of a man who'd finally said the thing he'd been terrified to say. The chair let out a long breath. We will investigate this, thoroughly. And until we complete that process, all enforcement actions related to Mr. Harding's property, including the gate hearing, are paused. Paused? Linda said, voice cracking. Paused, the chair repeated firmly. And Linda, pending review, your unilateral authority is suspended. The room went dead silent. Then Linda whispered, barely audible. You're making a mistake. Perhaps, the chair replied. But it won't be the first one made under your leadership. She grabbed her folders with shaking hands and stormed out. The door didn't slam, but only because she lacked the strength to give it that satisfaction. When she disappeared down the hallway, the board exhaled collectively. The chair turned to me. Mr. Harding, we appreciate your documentation. We'll reconvene in a week after reviewing everything. I nodded. I'll be ready. As I stepped outside, the gray sky finally broke, releasing a soft, cool rain that dotted the dust and darkened the wooden walkway. It felt like a reset, a brief cleansing moment before the next escalation. Because I knew Linda, suspension wouldn't stop her. It would ignite her, And the storm she brought next would force me to shift from exposing her errors to proving her intent. The real battle was only beginning. Linda didn't vanish after her suspension. She didn't even slow down. 3 days later, just before sunrise, I found fresh tire tracks carved across the frontage of my property. Deep, angry grooves tearing through the wet soil, slicing across the grazing line like claw marks. At the far end, near the mesquite cluster, a set of boot prints stopped abruptly, punched hard into the mud as if someone had been pacing or watching. I knelt, touching the tread, still damp, still warm almost, like the engine that made them hadn't cooled for long. "Damn it," I muttered. A soft shuffle behind me made me whip around, adrenaline spiking. It was Mark. He hovered near the fence line, shoulders hunched, hoodie soaked from the night's drizzle. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in 3 days. "You shouldn't be out here this early," I said. He swallowed. "Neither should you." His eyes flicked down to the tracks. He knew whose they were. We both did. I stood, brushing mud off my hands. She never did take losing well. "She's calling board members at 2 a.m., he whispered, "leaving messages about you, saying you're manufacturing evidence, saying you're threatening her. She's unraveling." "She's escalating," I corrected. "And escalation means she's scared." But the truth, even knowing that didn't make my stomach unclench. People who feel power slipping away do unpredictable things. Mark paced a few steps, rubbing the back of his neck the way he did when panic chewed at him. "I need to show you something," he said suddenly. I blinked. "Show me what?" He reached into his hoodie pocket with trembling fingers and pulled out his phone. The screen lit his face from below, turning his expression ghostly. "A text," he said. "From Linda." He handed me the phone. The message was short but vicious. "You made a mistake at the hearing. Fix it. Or your pergola becomes my first demolition order once I'm reinstated." I let out a sharp breath. "She threatened you directly." "She thinks she'll get reinstated next week," he said. "She thinks the board will realize she's indispensable." "But Luke," his voice cracked, "I can't go through this again. I can't have her targeting my family. I should have kept my head down." His hands shook, not subtly but in a full tremor. I stepped closer. "Mark, you did the right thing. You told the truth." He looked up at me then, eyes rimmed red, rain clinging to his eyelashes. "Being right doesn't protect people from her." "No," I said quietly, "but evidence does." He let out a bitter laugh. "And you think evidence will stop someone who rewrites the rules whenever she wants?" I didn't answer immediately. The wind rustled through the sagebrush, carrying the metallic scent of wet earth. Then he took a breath, a hard, shaky one, and said the words that shifted everything. "There's more, something I didn't tell the board." My chest tightened. "What kind of more?" He glanced over his shoulder as if expecting Linda to crawl out from behind the fence posts. Then he leaned closer. "She's been forging signatures." Silence, heavy, immediate. I stared at him. "Mark, are you sure?" "She bragged about it," he whispered. "Not to me, to a board member she thought would agree with her. I overheard it through the kitchen window during a backyard potluck. She said, and I remember this exactly, sometimes leadership means signing for people who don't understand what they should want." That sentence hit me like a hammer. Forgery, document tampering, fraud. That wasn't an HOA squabble. That was criminal. I exhaled slowly. "Mark, this could break everything wide open." "I know," he said miserably. "That's why I didn't tell you before. If she finds out I said anything—" "She won't," I said firmly. "And I don't need you to testify. I just need to know the truth. You telling me this makes it possible to find proof without you ever being involved again." He hesitated, then nodded, slowly, painfully, like a man stepping out of a burning house, but unsure whether the roof would collapse behind him. "What are you going to do?" he asked. I looked out across the mud and tire tracks, across the desert stretching beyond the neighborhood's edge. The sky was still bruised from dawn, but sunlight was starting to push through the clouds in the thin gold streaks. "I'm going to get the originals," I said. "If she forged signatures, the real ones will show it, and I know exactly where the HOA keeps physical records." Mark blinked. "That office is locked, and the manager only comes in twice a week." "Which is why I'm not going alone," I said. His eyebrows knit. "What do you mean?" I turned to him. You're the only person on the board she doesn't expect me to work with. His breath caught. Luke, You won't be incriminating yourself, I assured him. You're helping preserve evidence, that's all. And once we have it, she can't touch you. He stared at the mud, jaw working. Then, slowly, painfully, he nodded. A small nod, but real. The exact moment the conflicted witness became crucial. Tomorrow morning, I said, before she realizes we're moving. Mark exhaled shakily. Okay, I'm in. We stood there in the quiet desert morning, two men bound by fear of the same person, and now by a shared mission to expose her. Because the next move wasn't about the gate, or the fines, or even the land. It was about uncovering the rot in the foundation. And tomorrow, we'd start digging. We met before sunrise, exactly as planned. The desert was still blue and cold, the kind of cold that clings to your breath and makes your fingers stiff even through gloves. Mark waited in his truck at the edge of the cul-de-sac, engine off, windows fogged slightly from his, nervous breathing. When I tapped on his window, he nearly jumped out of his skin. You ready? I asked. He blinked rapidly, nodding too fast. Yes, let's just get it done. His voice trembled like the morning air. We drove together to the HOA's administrative office, a squat stucco building tucked behind the community pool. Most residents didn't even know it existed. The HOA kept it deliberately invisible, as if transparency were a liability. Mark slid out of the truck, his hoodie pulled tight around his face, shoulders curved inward. He kept darting glances over his shoulder like Linda might materialize behind one of the desert shrubs. She never comes here this early, he said, almost like he needed to convince himself. The manager only logs in on Tuesdays. And the key code, you're sure it's the same? You gave me last month's, I said. They don't change codes unless someone quits. He nodded, but didn't look reassured. I led the way to the back door, where a small keypad glowed faintly under an overhang. A tumbleweed rolled lazily across the parking lot, as if even the plants were trying to avoid involvement. Okay, I whispered. Last chance to bail. Mark's laugh was thin as paper. I've been bailing since the day I moved in, and look where that got me. I nodded once, punched in the 6-digit code, and held my breath. A soft beep. A click. The door unlocked. Inside, the air smelled like old carpet, toner, and forgotten bureaucracy. We slipped into the dark hallway, our footsteps muffled on the low-pile rug. Mark fumbled for the light switch, but I stopped him with a hand on his arm. No lights, I murmured. If she drives by, she'll notice. The emergency lights were enough. Dim, sterile illumination, casting long shadows on the beige walls. All right, I whispered. Records room? Mark pointed down the hall. Last door on the left. We moved like we were back in field operations, quiet, deliberate, every sound amplified in the stillness. When we reached the records door, Mark's hands were shaking too badly to grip the knob. I covered his hand with mine. It's okay. He nodded, inhaled sharply, and opened the door. Inside, metal filing cabinets lined the walls. A single computer workstation sat in the corner, monitor dark. Rows of binders, organized by year and category, ran along the far shelves. It felt like stepping into the backbone of the HOA, the place where power became paper. Which cabinet holds signatures? I whispered. Middle one, he said softly. Blue labels? We moved to it. Mark opened the drawer, and the smell of ink and dust drifted up. I scanned the folders, variance approvals, meeting minutes, compliance letters. Everything Linda had manipulated digitally should have had a paper counterpart, something she couldn't alter as easily. Okay, I murmured. Let's check last year. Mark reached for the first binder, but his hands faltered. He looked at me helplessly. I can't, he whispered. If she finds my prints, I shook my head. I'll handle it. I pulled the binder down, flipped it open, and found exactly what I hoped and feared I'd see. Signatures, dozens of them. Except, some weren't signatures at all. Some were perfect loops. Perfect spacing. Perfect replication. Too perfect. I'd seen this pattern before, during an engineering audit overseas, where a subcontractor had forged approvals to hide structural flaws. Identical pressure strokes. Identical letter widths. Identical indentations on pages printed weeks apart. Linda had forged at least 6 board members' signatures. I exhaled slowly. Mark, this is it. This is the proof. He swallowed hard. You're sure? I tapped the page lightly. I'd stake my license on it. No two signatures are this identical unless they're copied. He stared at the binder like it was radioactive. Then something shifted in his expression, fear mixing with something else. Resolve. I have something too, he murmured. Something I didn't tell you. I looked up sharply. What? He pulled out his phone and opened a recording app. After the hearing, I recorded a conversation with Linda. My breath caught. You what? She cornered me by the mailbox again, he whispered. Said if I ever contradicted her authority again, she'd make sure my pergola and my job would be in compliance with her vision. I got all of it. He held out the phone, the recording waveform pulsing across the screen. Mark, I said quietly, you just gave us everything. He looked sick. I didn't mean to. I just hit record because I was scared. I didn't know what she'd do. That's enough, I said. More than enough. We packed the binder into my folder, locked the cabinet, and slipped out of the office as quietly as we had entered. Outside, dawn finally broke across the desert, slicing gold light over the rooftops. It felt like the start of something bigger than both of us. We weren't just gathering evidence now. We were building the case that would topple Linda's entire regime, and the board meeting where we'd reveal it was coming fast. By the time we reached my truck again, dawn had burned off the last of the blue morning chill. The desert light sharpened everything, the gravel, the stucco houses, even the nerves crawling under Mark's skin. He stood beside the passenger door, arms wrapped around himself, staring at the HOA office like it might explode behind us. You okay? I asked. He nodded stiffly but didn't speak. His jaw worked like he was chewing down panic. Mark, I said softly, we're past the point of turning back, but we're also past the point where she can sweep this under the rug. He exhaled shakily. I keep thinking she's watching us. She's not, and even if she is, she doesn't know what we have. I didn't need to tell him again. We had two things she couldn't bury: forged signatures in her handwriting patterns and his recording. Combined, it was stronger than anything I'd dared hope for. But this next part had to be handled carefully. If we walked into the board meeting swinging evidence like a sledgehammer, Linda would immediately claim it was stolen, fabricated, or taken out of context. We needed something cleaner, methodical, undeniable. We're not presenting this as an ambush, I said. We structure it like a formal assessment. Mark frowned. What do you mean? An engineering report, side-by-side comparisons, an explanation of patterns, metadata logs, board approval sequences, anything that makes this objective instead of emotional. Mark blinked at me like I'd just spoken another language. Luke, I mean this kindly, but does the board even understand half of that stuff? No, I said, but they understand dishonesty, and they'll understand manipulation, and once they see the pattern, they'll understand why it matters. He rubbed his palms together. What can I do? Help me make it airtight. Back at my place, we spread everything across the long dining table. Binders, printed screenshots, metadata comparisons, Mark's phone recordings queued and ready. Between the hum of the fridge and the ticking wall clock, the house felt like a war room. Start with the signature sets, I said. Mark pulled up a chair and began sorting. His hands shook at first, then less and less as he settled into the task. Having something concrete to do seemed to ground him. I worked on the digital timeline, printing out layers of document versions, highlighting differences in headers, formatting quirks, late-night uploads, unauthorized edits. My engineering training made seeing patterns second nature, but this wasn't concrete or steel. This was the architecture of manipulation. The picture that formed was damning, not sloppy mistakes, deliberate falsifications, intent. Around noon, Mark finally spoke. She's going to know I helped you. I looked up from the highlighter. You didn't do anything illegal, but she won't see it that way. No, I said, but the board will. And once they see this packet, they'll see why you came forward. He pressed a palm over his eyes. I think she targeted me because I'm not the kind of guy who fights back. I studied him, the tense shoulders, the constant glance toward the window, the way fear had hardened him over weeks of intimidation. You're fighting back right now, I said, and you're the reason the board will believe this. You're the one who saw behind the curtain. He let his hand drop, meeting my eyes. I don't feel brave. You don't need to feel it, I said. You just need to show up. His throat tightened, but he nodded. By late afternoon, we had the packet assembled. 36 pages of analysis, documentation, comparison, and evidence. Clean, structured, professional. The kind of thing a board couldn't ignore. I slid the binder shut. Next step is tomorrow's meeting. Mark swallowed. Public or private? Public, I said. It has to be. He looked like he'd been hoping for a different answer. Private lets her twist the narrative, I explained. Public gives us witnesses, minutes, and a record she can't manipulate. He nodded again, slower this time. Then his phone buzzed. He flinched so hard he almost knocked over a stack of papers. When he saw the name on the screen, he went pale. Linda, he whispered. Don't answer, I said immediately. He didn't. He let it ring, each vibration rattling the table like a warning. When it finally stopped, he slumped back in his chair, breath shallow. She knows, he said. She suspects, I corrected. There's a difference. There was a long silence. The desert sun was lowering, turning the room gold and sharp. Then Mark straightened, shoulders square for the first time since I met him. Tomorrow, he said quietly. I'll be there. I nodded. Good. Because tomorrow is when we turn the tide. We packed up the evidence and sealed the packet, the weight of it strangely satisfying in my hands. Proof. Truth. Leverage. But what we didn't know, what neither of us could have predicted, was how far Linda would go to stop that packet from reaching the board. And the next move she made would drag this conflict into the public eye in a way none of us were ready for. I woke before dawn, long before my alarm, long before the desert light softened the horizon. Something in the air felt wrong, the kind of wrong you can't hear or see but feel, like a shift in pressure before a storm hits. I slid out of bed, pulled on my boots, and walked to the dining table where the evidence packet sat exactly where I'd left it the night before. Neat, clean, complete, ready for the board, except it wasn't. I froze. The binder was open, not just open, pages skewed, some shifted out of order, one half hanging off the edge. My heart jumped into my throat. I hadn't touched it since last night. I heard a car engine somewhere on the road, a slow idle, a pause. Then it pulled away. A chill crawled up my spine. I checked the back door. The lock was still latched, no signs of forced entry. But a determined person with HOA access codes wouldn't need to break anything. I thumbed through the packet. Relief washed through me. Nothing was missing. Whoever opened it didn't have time to remove anything, or didn't find what they were looking for. But they'd been inside my home. I sat down hard, the wooden chair creaking under me, my pulse hammered. Linda was escalating again, and today was the public board meeting. By the time I reached the community center, the parking lot was fuller than I'd ever seen it. Pickup trucks, SUVs, even a few golf carts. Neighbors clustered in tight circles, murmuring. Heads turned as I stepped out of my truck. A ripple moved through the crowd. Curiosity, tension, expectation. Mark spotted me from the sidewalk. He hurried over, eyes wide with panic. Luke, did you see the bulletin? What bulletin? He swallowed, then pulled a crumpled printout from his pocket. It was a memo, clean, official-looking, printed on HOA letterhead. Emergency meeting called, subject. Community safety concerns regarding resident Luke Harding. My jaw tightened. This wasn't board approved, Mark whispered. She sent it out at midnight. She's trying to frame you before the meeting even starts. Neighbors eyed me, some sympathetic, others wary, a few downright hostile. Linda stood on the steps of the community center, clipboard in hand, hair perfectly styled, wearing a red blazer like she was stepping onto a stage. Her expression was composed, but her eyes, those gave her away. She was terrified, and terror made her ruthless. She tapped the microphone. Everyone, please take your seats. We have serious matters to discuss today. I leaned close to Mark. Stay near me. Don't let her box you in. He nodded, but his hands were already shaking. We walked inside together. The room buzzed with energy, anger from some residents, confusion from others, barely contained electricity from people who love drama more than facts. The board sat at the front table, looking exhausted before the meeting even began. The chair raised his hands. "Let's begin. Today's agenda," Linda cut in. "Point of order." The chair frowned. "Linda." She stepped forward like she owned the floor. "Before any fabricated accusations are presented, I want to address a safety concern that I believe the board has overlooked." Fabricated. She meant my evidence. I stood. "You want to address safety?" I asked. "Let's talk about breaking into my house last night." A gasp moved through the room. Linda's expression didn't flicker. "More lies. This is exactly why I called this emergency meeting. Mr. Harding has become increasingly erratic." "That's enough," the chair snapped. The treasurer leaned into his mic. "Linda, this behavior is exactly why you were suspended." The resident stirred. Linda's composure cracked for a moment. Just a moment, but enough for the room to see it. I lifted the packet. "I came prepared to discuss the gate, but what I have goes far beyond that. The board deserves the truth, and so does the community." I walked to the table, placing the packet directly in front of the chair. He flipped it open, his brow furrowed. The secretary leaned in, eyes widening at the first comparison sheet. "What is this?" he whispered. "Proof," I said simply, "of forged signatures, unauthorized variances, altered minutes, manipulated approvals, patterns consistent with deliberate falsification." Murmurs erupted around the room. Mark stepped closer, voice trembling but audible. "And I have a recording." He swallowed hard. "Of Linda threatening to retaliate against me if I spoke up about her off-record meetings." Gasps. Someone muttered, "That's illegal." Another whispered, "I knew she was doing something." Linda's face went white. "You little traitor," she hissed at Mark, voice sharp enough to cut. He flinched, but he didn't back down. For the first time, the chair stood. "Linda, leave the room." "No," she snapped. "I built this community. I held it together." "You manipulated it," I said, "and you tried to destroy every person who didn't bend to your control." The treasurer pushed the packet toward the center of the table. "We need to adjourn for a private review, now." "No!" Linda screamed. "You're all fools. He's dangerous. He's lying. Her voice cracked, broke, turned into something raw and desperate. Security, 2 volunteers who usually handled crowd control during the pool season, stepped toward her gently. "Ma'am, we need you to step outside." She shook her head wildly. "This is my board." But they escorted her out as the room watched in stunned silence. The door closed behind her. For the first time since this war began, Linda was on the outside, with no authority, no stage, and no control. And the board was ready to see the truth for themselves. What happened next would be the breaking point. The moment the entire community witnessed the collapse of her power. The moment the door shut behind Linda, the room felt like it was tilting. Like all the tension she carried had been holding the ceiling up, and now everyone was waiting to see if it would fall. The board chair scrubbed a hand across his forehead, then looked at me in a way he never had before, not as a problem, but as someone he should have listened to a long time ago. "We're resuming," he announced, voice tight, "publicly. The community deserves transparency." A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd, agreement, relief, disbelief. No one moved to leave. Even the residents who had always sided with Linda leaned forward in their folding chairs, eyes sharp with sudden curiosity. The treasurer opened the evidence packet again. "Mr. Harding," he said, "walk us through your findings." I nodded and stepped toward the projector table, sliding the first comparison sheet onto the stand so the overhead camera could display it on the wall behind the board. The screen flickered to life, and the room went still. "This," I said, pointing, "is a signature from an approved variance dated 8 months ago. And this," I tapped the second image beside it, "is a signature from a different variance supposedly signed by the same board member 2 months later. The signatures were identical, down to the loops, down to the angle, down to the hesitation mark before the last stroke. Human signatures vary," I explained. "Pressure, speed, angle, even mood. But these are copy-paste perfect. And not digitally copied, hand-forged. Every stroke repeats. That only happens when someone is tracing." A resident in the back muttered loudly. "Well, damn," I continued. Now, look at this timeline. I tapped the next slide. Minutes posted after the meeting should show single-entry timestamps. Instead, these records show multiple edits by an unauthorized account at 2:16 a.m. the night before they were approved. The secretary leaned closer to the screen, face paling. That's impossible. Our system logs every edit. It does, I said, which is why the edits show up even if someone hoped they wouldn't. Whispers grew louder. The board members exchanged looks, fear, shock, dawning resentment. I switched to the next slide. Variance logs. Notice how 16 items were approved without a quorum, all under Linda's credentials. According to HOA bylaws, this invalidates every enforcement action derived from these approvals, including those against my property. Someone clapped. A single sharp clap. Then another. Then voices. This explains everything? My patio request was denied, while hers got approved overnight. She's been running this place like her own kingdom. But the moment that shifted the entire trajectory wasn't mine. It was Mark's. He stepped forward like he was moving through thick water, chest tight, hands trembling. He lifted his phone, voice barely above a whisper at first. "I have a recording," he said. All eyes turned to him. He hit play. Linda's voice filled the room, sharp, venomous, unmistakable. "If you contradict me again, I'll make sure your pergola comes down. Don't forget who approved it. One complaint and your little family project disappears. Do you understand me?" A hush fell so absolute you could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Mark's eyes were glassy, but he didn't look away. He didn't retreat. He stood there, small but immovable. The board chair's jaw tightened. "Mark, why didn't you bring this to us sooner?" He swallowed. "Because she made it clear what would happen if I did." The room erupted, voices rising in outrage, disbelief, anger. "This is abuse! She threatened him. She forged our votes. She broke into Luke's house. I saw her car down his road last night." I blinked. That last voice came from Mrs. Alvarez, my neighbor from 2 lots over. She stood with both hands gripping her purse strap. "I saw her car lights at 2 in the morning, she said. "I thought it was odd. Now I know why." The board didn't have to deliberate. Not really. The truth had already drawn its own conclusions. The chair raised his hands. "Order, please, order." The crowd quieted enough for his next words to land like a gavel. Effective immediately, Linda Taylor is removed from her position on the HOA board pending full investigation. All enforcement actions she initiated are nullified, and this board will contact outside authorities to review the forged documents. A wave of shock rippled through the community. "And regarding Mr. Harding," the chair continued, "your property rights, including your livestock easement, are fully restored. The board apologizes for the distress this process has caused." I nodded, though my chest was tight with everything I hadn't said for months. Then the doors burst open. Linda stormed back in, flanked by 2 confused volunteers who'd tried but failed to stop her. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she shouted. "You can't fire me. This is my community." Her voice cracked on the last word. But it wasn't a roar. It was a plea. For the first time, the residents saw her not as a leader, but as someone drowning in her own power. The chair spoke calmly. "Linda, please leave. The board will contact you through legal channels." She stared at me with absolute blinding hatred. And then she did the last thing she had left. She turned and fled. The room exhaled. The showdown was over. But the aftermath, that was still ahead. The room emptied slowly after Linda fled. Neighbors clustering in anxious knots, the board whispering among themselves, Mark standing beside me like a man bracing for aftershocks. Outside, the desert sky had begun to darken into one of those late evening violets, the kind that fades upward into black. But the air felt different, lighter, like the pressure finally broke. People approached me, some quietly, some apologetically. Mrs. Alvarez squeezed my arm. The Henleys from Lot 14 shook my hand. A few residents who had once echoed Linda's every word now looked ashamed, offering stiff nods or murmured apologies. It wasn't vindication. Not exactly. But it was something I hadn't felt since this whole ordeal began. Relief. Mark stayed close, chewing his thumbnail until I gently lowered his hand. "You did good today," I told him. He let out a shaky laugh. "I thought I was going to throw up the entire time." "But you didn't," I said. "You stood up, in front of everyone. You did the one thing she never expected from you." He stared at the floor. "I'm just glad it's over." "It's not," I said quietly. "Not yet. There will be investigations, maybe legal action, but the worst part, the part where she had power, that's done." He nodded slowly, letting the truth settle into him like warmth. We stepped outside together. The cool night wind brushed against our faces, carrying the smell of creosote and fresh dust, the scent that always rises right before a desert storm. The community center lights buzzed behind us, moths flickering around the bulbs. "Luke," he said after a long silence, "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," I replied. "You helped save this neighborhood from someone who was tearing it apart. That's enough." He looked at me with something like gratitude, deep, quiet, heavy. Then he walked toward his truck, shoulders no longer hunched, steps no longer hurried. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked like a man not expecting to be punished for existing. I stayed behind a moment longer, leaning on the railing, listening to the hum of distant cicadas. The sky was nearly black now, pricked with stars. Peaceful, honest. The opposite of everything this conflict had become. When I got home, my property looked untouched. No fresh tire tracks, no prying eyes, no clipboard hanging from the post. The gate stood tall, steel spikes catching the faint glint of moonlight. Strong, resilient, ugly to some, sure. But it told the truth about this land. It wasn't here for decoration. It was here to stand. I walked up to it, ran my hand along the battered rail, feeling the dents from every hit Linda had delivered long before the final crash. I thought of that night, her headlights blazing, her voice shrill and desperate, her accusations frantic. And I realized something. Linda didn't hate the gate. She hated that it didn't break. People like her only feel powerful when they can push until something snaps. But this time, because of steel, because of evidence, because of Mark, because of every quiet choice to resist instead of surrender, she snapped first. For the first time in months, I breathed deep without grinding my teeth. A coyote yipped out in the distance. Another answered. The desert carried on, indifferent to the chaos humans brewed under their HOA banners. I walked onto the porch, sat in my old wooden chair, and let the quiet sink in. My cattle grazed somewhere out beyond the fence, their silhouettes barely visible in the fading light. My land was safe, my rights restored, my peace slowly returning. But most importantly, the community had seen the truth. Openly, publicly, permanently. And truth, once shown, doesn't go back into the shadows. Looking back now, if you ask me what made the difference, the steel spikes, the engineering analysis, the quiet witness stepping into the light, I'd say it was all those things woven together. A victory not of force, but of exposure. My professional eye caught what others didn't. Mark's courage filled the gaps I couldn't see, and when it all came together, it formed something stronger than any gate I could weld. Accountability. As for Linda, well, the investigation went on. The board took steps, authorities got involved, but that's another chapter, and honestly, one less dramatic than the moment she lost the room. That moment was the real ending. So here we are, gate standing, land secured, witness protected, truth out in the open. And if you followed this story all the way here, I'll ask you this. What would you have done if someone kept ramming your life and expecting you to break? If you want more stories where justice doesn't come easy, but comes, stick around and subscribe, because out here in the desert, conflicts don't end quietly, and neither do the truths behind them.